What if everything you were taught about money was completely wrong and you found out later in life that you actually had no idea what you were doing? Most of us want to build generational wealth. We want to be successful and have something to pass down to our kids, but we have no clue how to do that. Well, years ago, I ran across this book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. In this book, he claims to have all the answers that you need to build generational wealth. But is he telling the truth, and does his stuff really work? Through this video, I'm going to try to explain to you why I actually believe him, and I'm going to walk you through what I did to follow some of the steps and what the outcome was. So stick with me to the end, and I'll actually show you how I converted a $10,000 student loan into $1 million real estate portfolio in less than 5 years using some of the stuff I learned from this book. But before we get into that, guys, please like, please subscribe, and if you find value in this, please leave some stuff in the comments that let me know what you want to hear and learn about next. So, diving straight in. I was 25 years old. I was going to work every day. I was working hard every single day. And every single one of my friends was in the same position I was in. We were going so hard and we had nothing to show for it. So at the end of the year, I was so fed up that I said, I have to find a different way. I need to find a solution to find a way to better my family's outcome. And what I started to do was I started to skip going and eating lunch on my lunch breaks. And instead, I would go to my car every single day at around 12:30 and read for an hour straight. I picked up this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I started reading it, and it blew my mind. Like, I truly couldn't understand where all these concepts had been hiding all the years I had been living up to that point. So in this book, he makes the claim that you follow these steps and you can build generational wealth. And these steps were many, but I will give you 3. Step number 1, rich people buy assets and then let those assets generate enough income to fund their liabilities. Poor middle class people do the complete opposite. We work hard, we buy stuff that we either don't need or that is too expensive for us, and we stay in this cycle of debt, bills, payments, and never really have that chance to generate true wealth. Step number 2, rich people don't work for money. They work for skills. They work for a specific purpose that will allow them to increase their earning potential in the future. That is their top priority and the reason why they work. And number 3 is rich people stay out of the rat race and they do not allow themselves to get stuck in this cycle where they work hard every day just to be able to pay the bills, to work hard every day thereafter. So I'm gonna walk you through these points in detail. Point number 1, buying assets. So first of all, let's break down the difference between an asset and a liability, because a lot of what we were taught in school is just completely wrong. An asset is something that appreciates over time, and even more important than that, ideally it's something that gives you cash flow every single month, or at least when you sell it. A liability is something that, even if it has some type of perceived value, is costing you money, or is depreciating over time, or is something that will ultimately make you broker and poorer over the course of your lifetime. So even when you think about housing, for example, you can have an investment property that is definitely an asset because you've got a tenant sitting in there giving you monthly payments, paying down your mortgage while it's appreciating in value and giving you cash flow. Hopefully, if you buy it right, that is an asset. You can have a house that you live in that is nice, that is comfortable, and it has a whole nother meaning, but technically, if it's costing you money, it's a liability. All the other liabilities are pretty common, such as cars and jewelry and clothes and Yeah, some of these things from a banker's point of view could be considered assets because you can write down their value on a piece of paper. But the real question is, how long can you live off of those things and continue to earn an income versus will they be something that even after you sell them, you can't do anything else with them? So that's the difference between an asset and a liability, first and foremost. And this cycle that the wealthy people use, which Robert Kiyosaki explains in this book, is they spend all of their energy and effort, if they are working in corporate America, they're working so that they can accumulate as many assets as possible, like a game of Monopoly. Once they get these assets, they let those assets grow through compound interest, through cash flow appreciation, and then they use the earnings from that income that they're getting through these assets to then buy the cars and the clothes and the jewelry. And in the book, Robert Kiyosaki gives an example of wanting a Porsche and saying that he was working a sales job, but instead of actually using his salary from his sales job to buy his Porsche, he used the salary that he was making at this high-paid job to invest in a small rental property. Then he let the rental income from the rental property pay his Porsche note every single month so that he was never dipping into his investment fund and he could always save up for that next investment. So if we flip this concept on our heads, then we'll realize that all of the stuff that we're buying on credit, all the stuff that we're buying before we actually have the asset to afford those things is making us poorer and by default helping us avoid the opportunity of building generational wealth. Step number 2, which is the rich don't work for money, but they work for skills, is so important. And he uses this example so often throughout this book, where one rich dad taught him all of these concepts about marketing and business management and sales and logistics, and what he really broke down throughout all of these different storylines in the book were that no matter what job he was at that job to gain a specific skill that would help him manage his business so much better in the future when he had his own thing going. And that's why we need to be looking at every job we take and every career path we go down like a training ground for what we want to do next. So one of the examples was Robert Kiyosaki at a young age ended up joining the armed forces so he could learn how to be a leader, so he could learn how to manage men and learn how to call shots under pressure. That was a skill he was trying to build. Then he went to work for Xerox, and that was so he could learn how to sell. He had to understand how to market himself and how to put himself out there and how to build that confidence to take no's and to hear rejection, because sales and marketing are such big tools when you're running your own business. Those were some of the things that he had to go learn from corporate America, take back to his own business, and then use that information to be so much more successful in the future. That's what wealthy people do. They take the skills from all these places that they've worked and then use those skills to help them generate their own source of income. Last, he talked about how rich people avoid the rat race. And I'm gonna walk you through a scenario that he walked through in the book, and this is exactly like my life early on. So most people grow up, live on their own. Over time, they find somebody that they love and they get married. Now, they have 2 incomes usually, and these 2 incomes, if done right, could be used to live at the same level that they were living individually and then invest the difference so that they can start to build that wealth fund, right? But instead, what most of us do, and what I was guilty of, is you get married and instantly your expenses go up. You find a bigger house than the apartment that you were living in. You buy nicer cars. You start to live the American dream. And over time, you get stuck in this cycle because you noticeably increase your expenses with every promotion that you get. You take slightly nicer vacations. You have slightly nicer meals on the weekend. Instead of cooking, you eat out way more. But what happens is you're never using those extra funds to invest, so you're never building that pool of assets to help you actually accumulate wealth and be able to free yourself from the race. And in many instances, once you start having kids, now it's even harder. And in a lot of ways, you end up going into debt. Even though you make more money, have more resources at your disposal, you actually are poorer than you were when you were in college, or you're poorer than you were when you first got married. So many Americans live that as their reality, and that is what we call the rat race. And Robert Kiyosaki breaks that point down so much in this book that it was drilled in my mind. Do whatever you have to do to escape the rat race. Meaning you got to work with so much intensity to pay off your debt as quickly as possible, your consumer debt, to avoid lifestyle creep, which means every time you get a new raise or a new promotion, you don't go buy a more expensive car. You don't go buy a more expensive house. You don't trade up your lifestyle. You try to live within your means for the next year or two and stack that extra bread, and then you can start to use that money to invest and build your freedom funds so much faster. Because once you have that flywheel going with these assets, purchasing more assets, reinvesting and reinvesting and reinvesting, then you'll be able to free yourself so much quicker. And then once you get free, you can do the final stage of the game, which is have time to think, have time to strategize, have time to develop new business models, have time to create, have time to be an angel investor, have more time with your kids and with your family and doing the things that you're passionate about and not just the things that help you pay the bills. This book taught me how to think. It taught me how wealthy people structure their lives. It taught me what the priority is. It taught me what to avoid. And it also made it okay to sacrifice when other people were doing the things that looked right at the time. They were driving the nicer cars. They were taking the nicer trips. They were living in the bigger houses. And all those things are possible, but if you buy those things through debt, then we're gonna be stuck in that same rat race for the rest of our lives. So to answer the initial question, yes, I do think that the steps in Rich Dad, Poor Dad are valid, and I would encourage every one of you to go read that book, take notes, reread it, listen to it on Audible, and really embody those messages, because it's difficult, but over time you will be so grateful you took the steps necessary to free yourself from the rat race. So now, just like I promised, I'm going to show you exactly how I took the methods that I learned in this book to actually convert a $10,000 student loan into $1 million real estate portfolio. This was around the age of 27 when I started investing in buy and hold real estate in Newark, New Jersey. I had read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I was super, super eager to get started, and I had very little money. I had about $4,000 to my name. That was my only source of savings and security, right? My wife was in school at the time. We were living in New York. She was going to fashion school, and I actually just asked her if she would be willing to take out an extra $10,000 in student loans, because I felt so passionately about taking this leap of faith and getting my investing journey started. I was amped up off of reading this book, right? So she took out the $10,000, and what I did at the time was I started networking heavy. I was going to real estate meetup after real estate meetup, talking to experts, talking to people who were doing deals, and I came across this guy who was fixing up properties in New Jersey and selling them to younger investors. And what we called this method that I used was house hacking, where basically you can use an FHA loan to get a low down payment, even if it's an investment property with multi-units. As long as it's 4 units or less, you can live in one of the units, rent out the other units, right? And then over time, move out, and now you've got an investment property for a very low dollar value. So what I did was I took that $10,000, combined it with the money I had in my bank account, and I actually got approved for a loan and bought a multifamily property for $350,000. I only had to put 3.5% down, so I actually ended up putting down just under $13,000. That was my start. And from there, I was able to rent out the other units. I was able to make that cash flow every single month because the tenants that were in the other 2 floors were able to pay my mortgage and put some money in my pocket every single month. So I started with $10,000 of a student loan. I took that money, I invested it in buying a $350,000 property. Over a 3-year span, that property increased in value from $350,000 to just shy of $500,000. I was able to pull out some cash from the equity in that property, still hold on to the property, take the cash that I got from the appreciation and use it as a down payment on another 3-family unit right up the street from that property. So within a 5-year span, that $10,000 loan allowed me to purchase one property that appreciated over time. Now that asset gave me cash to buy another asset, and the other house was worth $450,000 when I purchased it. And in the course of another year, that house had appreciated to over $500,000. So lo and behold, in a 5-year span, my $10,000 student loan had purchased 2 properties, and the portfolio was worth more than $1 million. And it was like money was created out of thin air. These are the concepts that the book Rich Dad Poor Dad goes in detail on. And this is why I encourage you all to read it, to change your mindset, and to believe that everything that you want is on the other side of the sacrifice that you make in order to build this generational wealth.